Hello and welcome to Selah Podcast. Selah is a fast that we do here at the Refuge Church every winter and summer. And over this season in the summer, we're just taking some time to pause and consider what it looks like when you fast and pray. And so for this season specifically, we're taking a closer look at really going after a season of breakthrough or clarity or guidance in those circumstances in your life where you're just feeling like you don't know where to go next. And time of prayer and fasting can be really key in being able to go after God and knowing what your next steps are. So I'm joined here today by our guest, Mike. Mike, so glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
So can you tell me a little bit about your connection to the Refuge for those who don't know who you are?
I've been a member of the Refuge since 2008, back when we were even on Central Drive in the old building. Been serving in the cafe for many years. For the most part, I've kind of played a behind the scenes kind of role here, with the church. Done some small groups, but that hasn't been anything real consistent until more recently. I've kind of stepped out more and been more visible around church.
Yeah. And so tell them what you're doing now here at the church.
I work part-time with in the facilities department, basically just doing whatever needs to be done with the church or at the church, setting up for events, minor repairs and things like that. So
awesome. So today specifically we're going to be talking about breakthrough in the area of your occupation. So if you're of the age to work, you know that this is one of those things that is a constant stressor. It can be a huge blessing, but it can also weigh on you as far as, am I at the right place or in the right season? I think especially as believers, we think about our occupation often connected to our calling, which could or could not be accurate, but ultimately we're called to be like Jesus. Mm-hmm. We know that, right? And we also need to provide for ourselves and for our family. So Mike's going to share a little bit about what breakthrough in his own occupation has looked like recently.
Okay. So recently, it's been since December of 23, I retired from teaching in North Carolina at 26 years under my belt. It started out, when I first began teaching, I always fully intended to do my 30 years. But then over the last 3 or 4 years, especially since COVID, I've noticed just the strain that public education has put on teachers, the lack of support from many different sides has definitely gone down. And I tried to battle through it over the first few years after COVID. Then when I turned 49 years old, I understand that when I turn 50, I can retire. And this little bug got in my head. I'm going to retire when I'm 50. And that it just, at first I thought it was just a joke. I'm just telling myself, you're not really going to retire. You're too young, this and that. But it started to build and intensify. And just the things that education was doing to me physically, I would come home, I wouldn't have anything left for my wife, for my kids, and I was spent, emotionally, mentally, phically, even. I couldn't do it anymore.
And you say 26 years casually, but I'm only 31, so that's most of my life.
Wow. Yeah, and it's always interesting when I have former students come up to me and tell me that they're married or they've got kids. That's when my age really hits me. Yeah. So hearing that, thanks.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
I respect the amount of time. That's awesome.
So when I decided to retire, teaching was my identity. You kind of mentioned something. It's my calling.
Yeah.
Whether it was my calling or just something that I did, I don't know if it was my calling, but I do have a servant's heart. So, and teaching is definitely serving is a part of teaching. So
Yeah.
that ties in. When I retired, for a month or two, I kind of felt lost. All of the plans that I had for possible employment after retirement, nothing seemed to pan out. And I got a little discouraged and, disappointed. Maybe I made the wrong decision. I wasn't hearing the right thing. I wasn't supposed to retire. And, there were days, not many, but, a day or two that I just stayed in the bed. I didn't want to talk to my wife. I didn't want to do anything with anyone. So, but through that, my wife and I still continued and tried to press into the Word, press into Jesus, and continuing to, even when I didn't want to, we still, had our morning time and things like that, more intentionally. And I had friends and family praying for me, and it I could feel it. I could physically feel it. And then one day, I just felt it's going to be okay. I felt at peace.
Yeah.
I didn't know what direction and what, as far as occupation or working, what I was going to do, but I did feel that peace.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of times until you get that feeling of peace, you feel like you can't take the first step.
Right.
Because you're too locked up.
Right. And for me, one of the things that I've done in the past, and I'm working on it, whenever there's a situation that I've had, I've always tried to handle it myself. Let me fix it. Let me do this. Let me do that. And until I just let it go and gave it to God and stopped trying to fix it myself, because I was trying to apply for this job just because I didn't have a paycheck, so I didn't really want to do it, but it was just a paycheck, just a job. So it just got to the point where he's got me.
Yeah.
And that's when it was right about that time. Turning 50, I'm able to go to Young at Heart. Love those guys and women and men. I love them. They're awesome. Wise counsel is one thing that I've tried to surround myself with in my later years. And Sylvania mentions that there's positions available at the church. I let it go in one ear and out the other. And then I hear from my daughter, who's in RDS, hey, Dad, they have positions, at the church. Again, yeah. It's a church. I'm not going to work at the church. Then my wife comes home from women's worship on the Monday, tells me the same thing. 3 times, it's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
So, okay. I think the thing that kept me from applying initially was doubt in myself, insecurity in myself. I'm not a good enough Christian to work at a church. Mm-hmm. I still have things that I'm dealing with that if I work at the church, everyone's going to know, everyone's going to hear, everyone's going to see. So, and I know that was just the enemy.
Yeah.
That's just, him trying to discredit me. but again, with that peace, let me just try it.
Yeah.
So I apply for the position, and Mark Gasparini's in my interview. I was a member of their small group years ago. My wife and I were in their small group with his family, and Bonnie was in there. Like, oh, I know Bonnie too. Like, I do know people here, and it just made me comfortable. So they offered me the position. I accepted. Just part-time, and that's good enough for me. The very first week that I was on staff, it was on the Tuesday we had staff chapel, and I was blown away. I immediately left staff chapel, and I called some of my coworkers that were still teaching. I said, "This is what work should feel like. This is, we've had time to praise and worship, and we got a message, and I just felt welcomed, and appreciated, and that's something that I don't think many teachers feel. I don't think they feel respected. I don't think many of them feel appreciated, and it makes it hard to work in a place where you don't feel those things.
Yeah.
So it's just, and as I've been working here, I've also realized it's not just working in a church. We can have this anywhere. Whatever your job, you don't have to work in a church to have that feeling of being appreciated and respected, and valued.
Yeah.
You can, if you're an electrician, you can have it at your job. A plumber, you can have it there. But I think it does start with the Word. You have to bring His Word with you, the Holy Spirit with you. It's available to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the few things initially that stood out about your story is even talking about being in that season where you felt like almost like you couldn't move, but you had first move you did make was to be like, okay, well, I do submit this to you, which is, I think, totally how God works, because when you feel like you can't do anything, the one thing you can do is
Right.
give it to him because you're saying like, I can't do it, Lord. But then similarly, I feel like so many times when there is an opportunity I'm supposed to pursue, it comes through a few confirmations from people that I trust, because you're praying like, Lord, give me that sign, that guidance.
Yeah.
Often the guidance doesn't come from this big voice above, but he speaks through these people that are close to you because you already have trust with them. So then it's like, oh, why is it they're all saying this at the same time,
Right.
Which is awesome. But kind of as Mike was saying, for those of you listening who might be thinking about your own occupation, we're not saying the answer is you got to go work at a church necessarily. That did end up happening in his circumstance. But like you was sharing, I think that there are opportunities out there for each person who's desiring to be able to provide for you or for your family. But it takes a few steps, which is submitting it to God, listening for those confirmations of direction, right? And then once you're there, knowing that whether it was a church or an electrician, that you have to live out the Word in that setting. Because even in a church, we could all work here and it not be godly at all, or like reflect Him. So to those who might be in a season like you were in, where you're feeling lost or like you don't know next steps, what would you leave them with as an encouragement?
The one thing I would suggest is not to give up. And sometimes we need to, we're so busy in life that we don't pause. So, and to hear His voice, and just continue to build your relationship with Jesus. he might not answer your prayers immediately, but he'll answer when it's the best time for you. When you think you're on your last straw, that's when it'll come through. And just don't give up and keep pressing in.
Yeah, so we hope that is just an encouragement to you today. If you're feeling like you're stuck in a place where you don't know the next steps, that the Lord does have an answer for you, but it does take the steps of actually submitting it to him and listening for his voice. So we just want to invite you to join us this week. We're doing a time of fasting and prayer all week, all 7 days. And so if you haven't already joined in, we just want to challenge you to choose something that you want to fast. And we're going to be having these episodes each day with just a different way that the Lord has come through and break through in someone's story. And so we hope that you join us tomorrow.